Welcome back to Neville Manifestation. If you are ready to see what you once ignored, understand what you once excused, and step into a deeper level of awareness, consider joining our membership where real clarity begins and transformation becomes personal. When people think about the moment everything changed, they often imagine something dramatic, a confrontation, a betrayal, a clear breaking point. But in reality, the most powerful shifts are rarely loud. They are quiet, almost invisible, and that's exactly why they are so easy to dismiss in the moment. The change doesn't happen outside of you first, it happens internally, as a subtle shift in awareness. It's that moment where something feels slightly off, even if you can't immediately explain why. There's no clear evidence, no undeniable proof, just a feeling that doesn't sit right. And because it's not dramatic, the mind tries to smooth it over, rationalize it, and move past it. You might tell yourself you're overthinking, or that you're being too sensitive. You might look for logical explanations to override what your intuition is signaling. This is where many people get stuck, because we are conditioned to trust what we can see and explain, not what we feel. But awareness doesn't always arrive with clarity, it often arrives as discomfort. A pause in your usual pattern, a hesitation where there used to be certainty. It's the beginning of you noticing something you previously ignored or accepted without question. This kind of awareness is powerful because it doesn't depend on external validation. No one else needs to confirm it for it to be real. In fact, sometimes the environment around you may reinforce the opposite, encouraging you to stay the same, to keep things as they are. But once that internal shift begins, it quietly starts to change how you process everything. You begin to observe instead of automatically reacting. You start picking up on patterns rather than isolated moments. And even if you try to go back to how things were, something feels different, because you are no longer seeing the situation the same way. What makes this shift so significant is that it marks the beginning of self-trust. Not loud, confident self-trust, but a quiet recognition that your inner experience matters. It's the first crack in denial, the first step out of automatic patterns. And while it may feel small, even insignificant at the time, it sets everything else in motion. Because once awareness enters, it doesn't leave. It expands, it deepens, and it slowly reshapes how you understand your reality. That subtle moment, the one you almost ignored, is often the true beginning of change, because it's the moment you started to see, even if only just a little more clearly than before. People often expect change to be loud, decisive, and unmistakable. But emotional patterns rarely break that way. They don't shatter in a single moment. They weaken quietly over time, and the turning point is almost always clarity. At first, a pattern feels normal because it's familiar. You adapt to it, you work around it, and in many cases, you justify it. Even when it drains you or leaves you feeling unsettled, you may not immediately label it as a problem. Instead, you normalize it, because recognizing it fully would require you to confront something uncomfortable. Clarity begins when you stop looking at isolated moments and start seeing the pattern as a whole. It's no longer about one comment, one behavior, or one bad day. It's about the repetition, the predictability, and the emotional impact it has on you over time. That's when the illusion starts to fade. You begin to realize that what you once considered exceptions are actually part of a consistent dynamic. This shift doesn't require confrontation or dramatic action. It simply requires honest observation. As clarity grows, the emotional hold of the pattern starts to loosen. You're no longer as reactive because you're no longer confused. Confusion keeps patterns alive. Understanding weakens them. When you can name what's happening, you stop internalizing it in the same way. You don't automatically blame yourself, and you don't feel the same urgency to fix or manage the situation. Instead, there's a subtle distancing that begins to take place. This is how patterns dissolve, not through force, but through awareness. You don't have to fight them as much as you have to see them clearly. And once you do, your responses begin to change naturally, because you are no longer operating from the same level of misunderstanding. For many people, the moment everything shifts is not tied to something obvious, like a major argument or a clear act of harm. Instead, it's connected to a growing awareness of subtle but consistent experiences. Things like feeling dismissed, confused, or emotionally drained without fully understanding why. These experiences often revolve around patterns of manipulation, inconsistency, or emotional neglect, but they rarely present themselves in a way that is easy to label right away. That's what makes them so difficult to recognize at first. Manipulation, for example, doesn't always look controlling or aggressive. It can be quiet and indirect, showing up as guilt, deflection, or making you question your own perception of events. You may walk away from conversations feeling unsettled, yet unable to pinpoint exactly what went wrong. Inconsistency works in a similar way. One moment there may be warmth, attention, or connection, and the next there is distance or withdrawal. This unpredictability can keep you engaged, constantly trying to make sense of the shifts, often leading you to focus more on regaining the good moments rather than questioning the overall dynamic. Emotional neglect is even more subtle because it's defined by what isn't there. It's the absence of support, validation, or genuine presence. You may not notice it immediately because there's no clear incident to point to, just a gradual sense of feeling unseen or unimportant. Over time, these experiences accumulate, and your internal response begins to change. You might feel more anxious, more uncertain, or more preoccupied with maintaining the connection. The shift happens when you stop viewing these as isolated incidents and begin recognizing them as interconnected patterns. It's when you realize that the confusion you feel isn't random and the emotional impact isn't something you're imagining. This awareness can be unsettling because it challenges the narrative you may have been holding on to. But it's also the moment where clarity begins to take shape, allowing you to see the dynamic for what it actually is rather than what you hoped it would be. There is a powerful disconnect that can happen between what the mind tells you and what the body already knows. The mind is designed to analyze, explain, and create narratives that make situations feel manageable. It looks for logic, for reasons, for ways to keep things stable. But the nervous system operates differently. It doesn't rely on explanations, it responds to experience. It registers tone, inconsistency, emotional safety, and threat long before the mind organizes those signals into words. This is why you can find yourself saying, "Everything is fine," while your body feels tense, restless, or exhausted. The mind may be trying to preserve a sense of normalcy, especially if acknowledging the truth would feel overwhelming or disruptive. It may minimize what happened, compare it to something worse, or convince you that you're overreacting. Meanwhile, your nervous system is holding on to the reality of the experience. It remembers how you felt in that moment, the tightening in your chest, the unease in your stomach, the subtle sense of being on edge. Over time, this creates a kind of internal conflict. You start to feel disconnected from yourself because one part of you is trying to move forward as if nothing is wrong, while another part is quietly signaling that something is not right. The body doesn't forget patterns, especially repeated ones. If you are consistently in an environment where there is unpredictability, emotional withdrawal, or subtle tension, your nervous system adapts by staying alert. Even if nothing overtly harmful is happening in a given moment, your body may still respond as though it needs to be prepared. What makes this so important is that the body often recognizes truth before the mind is ready to accept it. That uneasy feeling, that sense of discomfort you can't fully explain, is not random. It's information. It reflects accumulated experiences that haven't been fully acknowledged yet. And while the mind may try to override or dismiss these signals, they tend to persist until they are recognized. Learning to pay attention to these responses is a key step in reconnecting with your own awareness, because it allows you to move beyond just what you can explain and begin to trust what you are actually experiencing. Clarity is often described as something liberating, something that brings relief and direction. But in reality, it can feel deeply uncomfortable at first. When you finally see a situation for what it is, especially if you've been emotionally invested in it, that awareness can feel like a loss before it feels like freedom. This happens because clarity doesn't just reveal the truth, it also dissolves the version of reality you were holding on to. The hopes, the expectations, the explanations you created to make sense of things begin to fall away, and that can leave a kind of emotional void. What you're grieving in that moment is not just the situation itself, but the meaning you attach to it. You may have believed in the potential of the relationship, the possibility of change, or the idea that if you just tried a little harder, things would eventually align. When clarity arrives, it interrupts that narrative. It shows you what is actually happening rather than what you hoped was happening. And even if that truth is healthier for you in the long run, it can still feel like something important has been taken away. This is why clarity can feel heavy. It can bring sadness, confusion, even self-doubt. You might question your past decisions or wonder why you didn't recognize things sooner. There can also be a sense of disorientation because the emotional framework you were operating within has shifted. What once made sense no longer does, and you are left in a space where you have to rebuild your understanding from a more honest place. At the same time, this discomfort is part of the transition. It marks the movement from illusion to awareness, from coping to understanding. While it may feel like a setback, it is actually a necessary stage of growth. Because once the initial sense of loss begins to settle, something else starts to emerge. A quieter, more grounded sense of clarity that is no longer tied to denial or wishful thinking. And from that place, the possibility of genuine freedom begins to take shape. Healing often gets misunderstood as something that begins after a situation ends or after a clear decision is made. But in reality, it starts much earlier. At the exact moment you stop explaining away what hurt you. As long as you are minimizing, justifying, or rationalizing your pain, you remain stuck in the same emotional loop. You may recognize that something doesn't feel right, but if you immediately follow that awareness with excuses, maybe they didn't mean it, it's not that serious, I'm probably overreacting, you interrupt your own ability to process what actually happened. This habit of explaining things away usually develops as a way to maintain stability. Acknowledging hurt can feel threatening because it may lead to difficult realizations or decisions. So instead, the mind tries to protect you by softening the impact, reframing the experience, or shifting the focus away from your own feelings. While this might provide temporary relief, it comes at a cost. It keeps you disconnected from your emotional reality and prevents you from fully understanding the situation you are in. The moment healing begins is when you allow yourself to say, "That hurt," without immediately trying to dilute it. It's a simple shift, but it is deeply powerful. You are no longer negotiating with your own experience or trying to make it more acceptable. You are acknowledging it as it is. This doesn't mean you become reactive or impulsive. It means you become honest with yourself. From that honesty, something begins to change. You start to trust your own perceptions more. You no longer need to rely as heavily on external validation to confirm what you felt. Your emotional responses begin to make sense to you, rather than feeling like something you need to control or suppress. This creates a foundation for real healing because you are no longer working against yourself. Over time, this shift allows you to respond differently. Instead of immediately dismissing discomfort, you explore it. Instead of overriding your feelings, you listen to them. And through that process, you begin to rebuild a connection with yourself that is based on clarity rather than avoidance. There is also a deeper layer to this process that many people don't recognize right away. When you stop explaining away what hurt you, you are not just acknowledging a single moment. You are often uncovering a pattern that has been repeating for a long time. That can feel overwhelming because it shifts the focus from "this one thing happened" to "this has been happening." And that realization can bring a mix of emotions: sadness, anger, even a sense of betrayal toward yourself for not seeing it sooner. But that reaction is part of becoming more aware, not a sign that you've done something wrong. What also begins to change is your internal dialogue. Instead of questioning whether your feelings are valid, you start asking why something affected you the way it did. That is a very different position to be in. One comes from self-doubt, the other comes from curiosity and self-respect. You begin to understand your emotional responses rather than dismiss them. And that understanding reduces the intensity of confusion you may have felt before. You're no longer caught in the loop of trying to figure out if something counts as hurtful. You recognize that your experience is enough. This shift can also affect how you relate to others. When you are no longer minimizing your own hurt, you become less tolerant of dynamics that require you to do so. You may notice that certain conversations feel different, or that you are less willing to accept vague explanations or inconsistent behavior. This doesn't mean you become rigid or unforgiving. It means your boundaries begin to form naturally, based on what you have acknowledged within yourself. At the same time, it's important to recognize that this process is not linear. There may still be moments where you fall back into old habits of rationalizing or second-guessing yourself. That doesn't erase the progress you've made. Awareness doesn't mean perfection, it means you catch yourself sooner. You notice when you are starting to dismiss your own experience and you gently bring yourself back to honesty. Over time, this creates a more stable sense of self. You are not constantly adjusting your perception to fit what is happening around you. Instead, you have an internal reference point that feels consistent. You trust your reactions more, not because you assume they are always perfect, but because you are willing to examine them without immediately invalidating them. And that willingness is what allows real change to continue unfolding, because you are no longer disconnected from the very signals that guide you toward what is healthy and what is not. Another important layer is how this shift changes your relationship with responsibility. When you stop explaining away what hurt you, you also stop taking responsibility for things that were never yours to carry. Before this awareness, it's common to internalize other people's behavior, believing that if something feels off, it must be because you did something wrong, didn't do enough, or need to adjust yourself further. This creates a cycle where you are constantly trying to fix what you didn't break. But once you begin acknowledging your hurt without minimizing it, you start to separate what belongs to you from what doesn't. That separation is not about blame, it's about clarity. This clarity also exposes the role of hope. Hope can be a beautiful thing, but in certain dynamics, it can keep you anchored in situations that consistently undermine you. You might find yourself holding on to potential rather than reality, focusing on what someone could be instead of what they consistently show you. When you stop explaining away hurt, that version of hope begins to shift. It becomes less about waiting for someone else to change and more about recognizing what is actually present. That can feel like a loss at first, because you are letting go of possibilities you once believed in. But it also frees you from being emotionally tied to something that isn't grounded in reality. There is also a shift in how you experience time. When you are minimizing your hurt, you tend to stay stuck in cycles, revisiting the same situations, having the same conversations, feeling the same confusion. But when you acknowledge your experience honestly, those cycles begin to break. You stop replaying things in the same way because you are no longer trying to reinterpret them into something more acceptable. Instead, you allow them to be what they were. This reduces the mental and emotional energy spent on trying to make sense of something that already showed you its pattern. As this continues, your sense of self becomes less dependent on external reactions. You are not waiting for someone else to validate your experience or confirm that something was wrong. You already recognize it within yourself. That doesn't mean you become closed off or disconnected from others. It means your foundation is no longer built on uncertainty. You can engage with people and situations without losing your own perspective in the process. And perhaps one of the most subtle but powerful changes is the way you begin to respond to discomfort. Instead of immediately trying to escape it or explain it away, you allow yourself to sit with it just long enough to understand it. That pause creates space for insight. It allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than react automatically. Over time, this builds a kind of emotional steadiness that doesn't come from controlling everything around you, but from being connected to what is happening within you. What often follows this stage is a quiet recalibration of your identity. When you stop minimizing your hurt, you're no longer shaping yourself around what keeps the peace or preserves a certain image. Instead, you begin to notice who you are without that constant adjustment. This can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because many of your previous choices may have been influenced by avoiding conflict, seeking approval, or maintaining connection at any cost. Without those drivers, there's a kind of emptiness at first, not because something is missing, but because something artificial is no longer taking up space. In that space, your preferences become clearer. You start to recognize what genuinely feels aligned versus what you tolerated out of habit. This doesn't happen all at once. It shows up in small moments. Pausing before you agree to something, noticing when a conversation feels one-sided, or realizing that your energy shifts around certain people or situations. These observations are subtle, but they are significant because they are rooted in awareness rather than reaction. There's also a growing sense of emotional accountability, but it looks different from what many people expect. It's not about blaming yourself for what happened. It's about being honest about what you participated in, what you overlooked, and what you now understand differently. This kind of accountability is empowering because it gives you insight without diminishing your worth. It allows you to learn from your experiences without turning that learning into self-criticism. As this awareness deepens, your boundaries begin to take shape in a more natural way. They are no longer forced or reactive. You're not setting them just because you think you should, but because something in you recognizes what feels acceptable and what doesn't. This makes your boundaries more consistent and less dependent on the behavior of others. You're not constantly adjusting them to maintain approval. You're holding them because they reflect your internal clarity. At the same time, your tolerance for emotional confusion decreases. Situations that once felt complicated begin to look simpler, not because they've changed, but because you are no longer trying to reinterpret them. You see what is happening more directly, without layering it with explanations that protect the situation at the expense of your own understanding. This doesn't make everything easy, but it does make it more honest. Over time, this honesty creates a different kind of confidence. It's not loud or performative, it's steady. It comes from knowing that you are no longer ignoring yourself and that whatever you face, you will meet it with awareness rather than avoidance. The day everything changed was never about them, the event, or the moment itself. It was about you finally seeing clearly. The illusion broke, the pattern revealed itself, and what once confused you now empowers you. You stopped reacting, started understanding, and that shift rewrote everything. Because once you truly see the game, you don't play it the same way anymore. You rise above it.